The wind howled through the fractured concrete of what was once Chicago's financial district, carrying the acrid smell of ionized metal and burnt circuitry. Elena Rodriguez pressed her back against a crumbling wall, her fingers tracing the worn photograph of her family, a ghost of memories stolen by the Kraxan invasion. Her comm unit chirped softly, a carefully modulated signal that would be invisible to Kraxan detection systems. Marcus's voice crackled through, barely above a whisper. "We've got movement in Sector 4. Kraxan patrol drone. Looks like a standard reconnaissance pattern." Elena's eyes narrowed. Nothing about this patrol was standard anymore. The Kraxan had grown paranoid, their occupation becoming increasingly suffocating with each passing year. Humanity had been reduced to less than a quarter of its pre-invasion population, scattered in underground networks, surviving on scraps of hope and meticulously planned resistance. "Patch me through to the Deep Sight team," she responded, her voice a controlled blend of determination and exhaustion. The underground resistance had become more than just a fighting force. It was the last repository of human potential. Scattered across hidden complexes beneath ruined cities, research teams worked with a desperation born of survival. They were humanity's last hope, transforming the remnants of human technology into something the Kraxan could never anticipate. Deep beneath the ruins of what was once Chicago's most advanced research center, Dr. Akira Chen reviewed the latest quantum entanglement data. Her hands moved with a precision that belied the months of malnutrition and constant threat. Beside her, a holographic display flickered, fragments of intercepted Kraxan communications, each piece a puzzle in their grand design. "The light absorption nanomaterials are stable," she muttered to herself, "but the quantum resonance is still 0.03% off our theoretical model." Most would have considered such a minute discrepancy inconsequential. But in the world of the resistance, 0.03% could mean the difference between total exposure and absolute concealment. A soft alert from the perimeter sensors caught Marcus's attention. He was the Resistance's digital phantom, a young hacker who had turned the Kraxan's own communication networks into a weapon of information warfare. His fingers danced across multiple holographic interfaces, weaving through encrypted channels, listening, watching, anticipating. "Rodriguez," he called out, "I'm detecting an anomaly in the Kraxan's communication protocols. They're running a diagnostic sweep of their outer colony communication relays." Elena's mind raced. A diagnostic sweep wasn't routine. It suggested something had triggered their suspicion. The Black Armada project was humanity's most closely guarded secret, a fleet being constructed in pieces, hidden in the shadows of asteroids and abandoned mining stations. The Resistance's leadership had made an impossible choice weeks ago. To protect the fleet's construction, they had allowed a small human settlement on Europa to be marked for relocation, a euphemism for certain death. The weight of that decision sat like lead in Elena's stomach, a constant reminder of the calculations they were forced to make. "We can't risk exposure," Elena responded, her voice tight. "Implement communication protocol, Omega-9. Complete radio silence for the next 72 hours. Marcus hesitated. Breaking communication meant potentially losing contact with multiple resistance cells. But he understood the stakes. One compromised transmission could unravel everything they had built. Unknown to most of the resistance, a traitor walked among them. Someone had been feeding subtle information to the Kraxan, not enough to trigger a full invasion, but enough to keep the occupation forces constantly probing, constantly searching. Dr. Chen looked up from her work, sensing the tension. "The first prototype is ready for initial testing," she said, her voice cutting through the mounting anxiety. "If our calculations are correct, we can render an entire battleship invisible to current Kraxan scanning technologies." It was more than just a technological breakthrough. It was a promise that humanity would not go quietly into extinction. As night fell over the ruined cityscape, Elena Rodriguez stared at the photograph of her lost family. The Black Armada was more than a fleet. It was vengeance. It was hope. It was humanity's final, defiant roar against a galaxy that had tried to silence them. And soon, very soon, they would emerge from the darkness. The Kraxan supply hub at Epsilon Eridani pulsed with the mechanical rhythm of interstellar logistics. Massive cargo containers shifted like metal monoliths, each one loaded with resources stolen from a dozen conquered worlds. Maintenance drones buzzed between massive storage arrays, their quantum-enhanced processors monitoring every microscopic detail. Commander Vaxthor, a veteran of 17 subjugation campaigns, felt something was wrong. His neural implants tingled with an inexplicable sense of unease, a feeling he'd learned never to ignore during his centuries of military service. "Recalibrate perimeter scanners," he barked to his subordinate. "Something feels incorrect." Little did Vaxthor know that incorrect was about to become the understatement of the galactic cycle. Miles away, hidden within the quantum-masked hull of the stealth carrier Defiance, Elena Rodriguez reviewed the final synchronization protocols. The ship was a marvel of human desperation and innovation, every system designed to exploit the smallest weakness in Kraxan detection technologies. Acoustic resonance modules are synchronized, Marcus reported from his holographic interface. "We're running at 0.02% detection probability." Dr. Chen's voice cut through the communication channel. "Remember, this isn't just an attack. It's a statement. Every action must communicate our resilience." The attack began not with a weapon, but with sound. Ancient human war songs, a compilation of martial music from every culture and era, began broadcasting across all Kraxan communication frequencies. Navajo war chants blended with Argentine tango rhythms. Scottish bagpipes merged with Zimbabwean battle songs. It was psychological warfare taken to its ultimate expression, a sonic representation of humanity's unbroken spirit. Vaxthor's neural implants overloaded. The music wasn't just sound, it was a weaponized cultural transmission that bypassed standard defensive protocols. Centuries of Kraxan military conditioning hadn't prepared them for this level of asymmetric psychological warfare. The first physical signs of the attack were almost anticlimactic. Quantum-shifted projectiles, invisible to standard scanning systems, began methodically destroying critical infrastructure. Each strike was precision calculated, targeting not just physical systems, but the intricate logistical networks that kept the Kraxan occupation machine running. Storage arrays vanished. Communication relays disintegrated. Entire sections of the supply hub simply ceased to exist, with no apparent cause. "Impossible," Vaxthor muttered, watching his tactical displays dissolve into static. Marcus's fingers danced across his interfaces. Structural integrity of primary cargo hub is now at 42%. They haven't even realized we're here. The psychological impact was as devastating as the physical destruction. Kraxan command structures relied on predictability and overwhelming force. This attack suggested something far more terrifying. An enemy that could strike with impunity, an enemy that understood them better than they understood themselves. Elena's voice was calm, almost detached. "Initiate final phase. Broadcast the message." A single transmission began broadcasting across all frequencies, not in Kraxan language, not in any standard galactic communication protocol. It was a simple message, translated into every known language. "We are still here. We have always been here, and we are not asking for permission anymore." The transmission was laden with compressed data packets, fragments of human history, cultural achievements, moments of resistance from every conquered world. It was more than a message. It was a declaration of existence. Vaxthor watched in horror as his entire command structure collapsed around him. The most sophisticated military force in the known galaxy was being dismantled by an enemy that seemed to appear and disappear at will. "Who are they?" he whispered. As quickly as it began, the attack ended. The Defiance and its accompanying stealth vessels simply vanished. No energy signatures, no weapon traces, just absence. In the aftermath, the Kraxan would discover they had lost over 70% of their critical supply infrastructure in the Epsilon Eridani sector. More importantly, they had lost something far more valuable: their sense of absolute control. Humanity's first strike had been delivered, and it was just the beginning. Back on the Defiance, Elena Rodriguez allowed herself the smallest of smiles. The real war was about to begin. The diplomatic chambers of the Galactic Concordance rarely witnessed such raw tension. Zara Cavell, senior diplomatic attaché of the Jareen, studied the holographic data streams with a mixture of fascination and calculated opportunism. Her species had endured its own long history of subjugation, first by the Kraxan, then by a succession of opportunistic galactic powers. Now the human attack at Epsilon Eridani presented something entirely unexpected, a potential pathway to liberation. Analyze the transmission again, she instructed her AI assistant. The cultural data packets from the human attack continued to fascinate her. Unlike typical military communications, these transmissions were a complex tapestry of human experience. Raw, unfiltered, deeply emotional. Across the galaxy, the ripple effects of the attack began to manifest in ways no one could have predicted. On the mineral-rich world of Corax Prime, a coalition of indigenous workers, long suppressed by Kraxan resource extraction protocols, began to whisper. The human transmission had infiltrated their communication networks, spreading like a digital wildfire. It wasn't just information, it was inspiration. Marcus, still aboard the Defiance, tracked these subtle shifts with a web of quantum-entangled communication nodes. Each intercepted message, each moment of rising hope, was another weapon in humanity's arsenal. "We're seeing exponential growth in resistance communication," he reported to Elena. "The Kraxan's communication suppression algorithms can't keep up with the decentralized nature of these transmissions." Elena understood the deeper strategy. This wasn't just about military victory. It was about dismantling the psychological infrastructure of oppression. Deep within a secure facility, Dr. Chen worked on something far more revolutionary than weapons. The quantum communication system she was developing would fundamentally alter how species could communicate and coordinate. It was a technology that threatened everything the current galactic power structures represented. "The entanglement protocols are stable," she muttered, reviewing complex mathematical models that seemed to dance between physics and poetry. "We're not just creating a communication network, we're creating a collective consciousness." The Kraxan leadership, meanwhile, descended into internal chaos. The attack had exposed more than just physical vulnerabilities. It had revealed deep fractures within their own hierarchical structure. High Executor Relmax, the third-ranking member of the Kraxan ruling council, saw an opportunity where others saw only threat. The human attack had created a power vacuum that could be exploited. Decades of military doctrine were being rewritten in real time. "The humans are not just a resistance," Relmax argued in a classified council session. "They are a systemic challenge to our entire paradigm of galactic control." Some council members saw this as heresy. Others saw it as a necessary evolution. Zara Cavell made her move. A carefully crafted diplomatic communique reached the human resistance, an offer of alliance that was as much about mutual survival as it was about shared liberation. "We have observed your methods," the message read, "and we propose a strategic cooperation that extends beyond traditional military alliances." The proposal was audacious. The Jareen would provide critical intelligence about Kraxan supply lines, communication protocols, and internal political structures. In exchange, they wanted access to the human communication technologies that had so thoroughly disrupted the galactic status quo. Elena recognized the offer for what it was, a fundamental reshaping of galactic power dynamics. "We're not just fighting a war," she told Marcus and Dr. Chen. "We're creating a new model of interstellar cooperation." The quantum communication nodes began to pulse with a new kind of energy. It wasn't just information being transmitted, it was possibility. As night fell on 1,000 different worlds, something was changing. The traditional boundaries between resistance and revolution, between oppressed and liberator, were blurring. Humanity had emerged from the darkness, and the galaxy would never be the same. The research facility looked like nothing more than a rusted maintenance complex nestled within the hollowed-out core of Ceres. To any external scanner, It was just another abandoned remnant of humanity's once thriving solar system exploration program. Dr. Imani Okoro ran her fingers along a quantum entanglement matrix that would have seemed like pure science fiction mere decades ago. Her team had spent years developing this technology, not in gleaming laboratories, but in makeshift workshops carved into asteroid interiors, always one step ahead of Kraxan detection. Kaido, she called to her lead engineer, run another resonance simulation on the nano-absorption layer. Kato Chen, a third-generation resistance scientist, looked more like a weathered mechanic than a quantum physicist. A complex tattoo of mathematical equations and star charts covered his left arm, a living testament to years of underground research. The story of their technology began not in moments of triumph, but in the darkest days of the Kraxan occupation. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, before becoming the military strategist of the Black Armada, had been a xenobiological researcher. Her groundbreaking work came from an unexpected source: Kraxan prisoners captured during early resistance operations. Every prisoner is a library, she used to tell her research teams. Their biology, their technology, their fundamental assumptions, all are data points we can leverage. The first breakthrough came from studying Kraxan neural implant technologies. Human scientists discovered that the rigid, hierarchical communication protocols of the Kraxan could be systematically deconstructed and reimagined. Beneath them, in a secure containment area, a single Kraxan prisoner sat in careful observation. Dr. Marcus Rodriguez, Elena's nephew and the Resistance's premier communications specialist, was conducting what appeared to be a routine interrogation. But this was far more than an interrogation. It was a complex information extraction process that blended psychological manipulation, quantum communication analysis, and pure scientific curiosity. "Tell me about the quantum communication relays in your third-tier communication networks," Marcus would ask, his voice calm and clinical. The Kraxan prisoner, designated Subject 0, didn't realize he was teaching humanity the key to breaking their own communication infrastructure. Dr. Okoro's current project represented the culmination of years of such careful research. The quantum entanglement matrix she was developing could do something previously thought impossible: create a communication network that was simultaneously everywhere and nowhere. Theoretical transmission stability is at 99.987%, Kaido reported, his fingers dancing across holographic interfaces. "We can now transmit complex data packets across galactic distances with zero detectability." It wasn't just about stealth. It was about fundamentally reimagining communication itself. The nano-absorption technology they had developed could render entire spacecraft invisible to traditional and quantum scanning methods, but its true genius lay in its adaptability. The material could dynamically reconfigure its molecular structure, essentially becoming whatever background it needed to blend into. A holographic display flickered to life, showing the evolution of their research. Scattered across multiple nodes, connected by quantum entanglement, were the collective minds of humanity's most brilliant survivors. This was distributed research taken to its ultimate expression. No single point of failure. No centralized system that could be compromised. A living, breathing network of human potential. "We're not just building a weapon," Dr. Okoro said quietly, more to herself than anyone else. "We're creating a new form of collective intelligence." Outside, the hollowed-out interior of Ceres seemed to pulse with a kind of potential energy. Generations of human resistance, of survival, of unbroken spirit, were compressed into this moment. The quantum leap was more than technological. It was evolutionary. Humanity was rewriting the rules of existence, not through brute force, but through an unprecedented combination of creativity, resilience, and collective imagination. And the galaxy was about to learn exactly what that meant. The frozen methane fields of Europa glimmered with an unnatural stillness. Lieutenant Aria Jung studied the holographic overlay of the Kraxan detention complex, her augmented eyes parsing data streams that would be invisible to ordinary human perception. Target acquisition complete, she whispered into her quantum-encrypted comm unit. "Operation Broken Silence is go." Weeks earlier, the Resistance had made an impossible choice. The small human settlement here had been marked for relocation, a euphemism that meant certain death. But that sacrifice was about to transform into something greater. The liberation wouldn't be a simple assault. It would be a surgical strike designed to broadcast a message across the galaxy. 3 simultaneous operations began. On Europa, Zhang's team would liberate the detention complex. Simultaneously, a resistance cell on Titan would disrupt critical Kraxan communication relays. And deep in the Proxima Centauri system, another team would strike at a key resource processing facility. Kira Nakamura, leading the Titan operation, moved with a precision born of desperation. Her team had spent months infiltrating Kraxan communication infrastructure, creating a network of quantum-entangled backdoors that would allow them to simultaneously shut down and hijack multiple systems. "Virus is in place," she reported, initiating communication cascade. The Kraxan relied on a hierarchical communication system that was both their greatest strength and their most significant vulnerability. By attacking multiple points simultaneously, the Resistance would create a cascading failure that would expose the fragility of their occupation. On Europa, Lieutenant Zhang encountered her first unexpected challenge. The detention complex wasn't just holding human prisoners. Dozens of species from conquered worlds were packed into cramped, inhuman conditions. The liberation would need to account for multiple species with different physiological requirements. "Change of plan," Zhang broadcast to her team. "We're extracting everyone." Repeat, everyone. It was a decision that would complicate their mission. Extra resources, higher risk, but fundamentally aligned with the Resistance's core philosophy. In the detention complex's central control room, a Kraxan mid-level administrator named Orcs experienced something unprecedented. The human attackers weren't just destroying. They were liberating. Prisoners of different species moved with a coordinated efficiency that defied the Kraxan's understanding of subjugated populations. Medical teams tended to the wounded. Communication specialists began establishing emergency networks. Children were carefully protected and moved to secure areas. This wasn't just a military operation. It was a systematic deconstruction of the occupation's entire philosophical infrastructure. Elena Rodriguez watched the multiple operation feeds from the Defiance. Each liberation was more than a tactical maneuver. It was a statement of humanity's fundamental belief in collective survival. "We're not just fighting a war," she murmured to Marcus. "We're rebuilding the concept of civilization itself." The Resistance had prepared for years. Each liberated group had been given emergency communication protocols, medical support packages, and most critically, hope. On Titan, Kira Nakamura's team completed their mission with clinical precision. The Kraxan communication network didn't just fail. It was systematically dismantled, with each data node replaced by Resistance-controlled information streams. Orcs watched in horror as the occupation's communication infrastructure collapsed. The carefully maintained illusion of control, meticulously built over decades, dissolved in moments. By the operation's end, over 40,000 prisoners from multiple species had been liberated. Resource processing facilities were converted into emergency medical and communication centers. The Kraxan presence in 3 critical star systems had been completely neutralized. But the true victory wasn't territorial, it was psychological. Every liberated prisoner carried with them a simple message. Resistance was possible, hope was real, and the galaxy was changing. As communication signals spread across conquered worlds, something fundamental shifted. The occupation was no longer an immovable reality. It was a system that could be challenged, could be broken. Humanity had done more than strike a blow against the Kraxan. They had shown the galaxy what true liberation looked like. The Nexus Concordance Chamber erupted in chaos. Representatives from a dozen star systems watched in collective disbelief as the holographic displays showed the catastrophic collapse of Kraxan military infrastructure. High Executor Ralmax stood alone, a singular figure of calculated defiance. Where other Kraxan leaders saw only destruction, He saw an opportunity for fundamental transformation. "This is not a defeat," he declared, his voice cutting through the pandemonium. "This is a catalyst." Aboard the Defiance, Elena Rodriguez received real-time intelligence from multiple quantum communication nodes. The Resistance had become more than a military operation. It was a living, adaptive organism that could process and respond to galactic events with unprecedented speed. Marcus tracked the emerging data streams. "We're seeing multiple independent resistance movements forming across conquered territories," he reported. "The liberation protocols are replicating faster than the Kraxan can suppress them." The turning point wasn't a single battle. It was a systemic collapse of an entire galactic power structure. On the research vessel hidden within the Orc cloud, Dr. Imani Okoro made a breakthrough that would change everything. The quantum entanglement communication system she had been developing was no longer just a communication tool. It had become a form of distributed intelligence. "It's self-evolving," she whispered to Kaido Chen, her hands trembling slightly. "The communication network is learning, adapting, creating its own neural pathways." This was beyond technology. This was the emergence of a new form of collective consciousness. The Jareen Diplomatic Corps, led by Zora Cavell, recognized the deeper implications immediately. This wasn't just a human resistance. It was a fundamental reimagining of how intelligent species could interact and organize. "They're not fighting a war," Zora explained to her senior advisors. "They're proposing an entirely new model of galactic civilization." Unexpected allies began to emerge. On the mineral-rich world of Corax Prime, indigenous worker collectives that had been suppressed for generations suddenly found themselves with access to advanced communication and liberation technologies. A Kraxan deep-cover operative named Luxbar made a critical decision. Embedded for decades in the occupation's intelligence network, he realized the Resistance represented something far more profound than a military challenge. "The humans are not destroying," Luxvar reported to his hidden communication node. "They are reconstructing." Elena understood the delicate balance. Each liberation, each communication, each strategic move was carefully calculated to not just defeat the Kraxan, but to create a path for future coexistence. The Black Armada's most advanced weapon wasn't a physical device. It was a communication protocol that could simultaneously exist in multiple states, transmitting information in ways that defied traditional understanding of physics and communication. Dr. Chen's quantum communication matrix began to show signs of something unprecedented. The communication network was developing what could only be described as emergent intelligence. It wasn't just transmitting information. It was interpreting, predicting, adapting. A superweapon was activated in the outer reaches of Kraxan-controlled space, a massive energy signature that could potentially obliterate entire star systems. But the Resistance was ready. The quantum communication network absorbed the weapon's energy, redistributing it across multiple quantum states. What was meant to be a devastating attack became nothing more than a momentary fluctuation in spacetime. Zora Cavell watched the events unfold with a mixture of terror and exhilaration. "They're not just resisting," she realized. "They're reimagining the very concept of resistance." High Executor Ralmax saw the writing on the wall. The Kraxan occupation was finished, but something far more interesting was about to begin. As communication signals spread across conquered worlds, a new possibility emerged. Not conquest, not occupation, but something entirely unprecedented. The galaxy was changing, and humanity was leading the transformation. The Kraxan homeworld of Nexcor burned with the intensity of 1,000 dying stars. Its massive planetary defense grid, once considered impenetrable, now hung in broken fragments across the upper atmosphere. Supreme Commander Kroll watched from the central command spire, understanding with terrible clarity that this was more than a military defeat. This was the end of a civilization's fundamental paradigm. Elena Rodriguez stood on the bridge of the Defiance, her reflection ghosting against the quantum-shifted viewscreen. Every moment of her life had converged to this singular point of confrontation. "Quantum interference pattern is stabilizing," Marcus reported, his fingers dancing across holographic interfaces that seemed to breathe with living intelligence. "We're achieving total systems integration across all Liberation fleet vessels." The assault on the Kraxan homeworld was unlike any military operation in galactic history. It wasn't about destruction. It was about systematic, surgical transformation. Zara Cavell and her Jarian diplomatic corps coordinated with resistance cells across multiple star systems. Each communication, each strategic movement, was a carefully orchestrated dance of Liberation technology. Dr. Imani Okoro's quantum communication matrix had evolved beyond any previous understanding of technological potential. The communication network was now a living, adaptive intelligence that could predict and neutralize threats before they fully materialized. "We're not just attacking," Elena said quietly to her command team. "We're offering a path to transformation." The Defiance moved through the Kraxan defense grid like a phantom, its quantum absorption technology rendering it invisible to traditional and advanced scanning methods. But invisibility was the least of its capabilities. Multiple resistance cells had spent years infiltrating Kraxan infrastructure. This wasn't a simple military invasion. It was a comprehensive system reboot of an entire galactic civilization. Communication networks collapsed. Planetary defense systems turned against themselves. Military command structures dissolved from within. Luxwar, the deep-cover Kraxan operative who had long since aligned with the Resistance, provided the final critical intelligence. The most vulnerable point in the Kraxan's central command structure was not a physical location, but a complex quantum communication hub. "Target acquired," Marcus announced, initiating quantum destabilization protocol. The attack was surgical, precise, almost elegant in its complexity. Supreme Commander Kroll watched in horror as the entire Kraxan command infrastructure began to unravel. It wasn't destruction. It was a systematic deconstruction of every foundational belief that had sustained their civilization. Dr. Chen's final breakthrough became evident. The Resistance had developed a communication protocol that could simultaneously communicate and transform. Each transmission carried not just information, but the potential for fundamental change. "We're giving them a choice," Elena explained to her team. "Not surrender. Transformation." The quantum communication matrix began broadcasting across all Kraxan communication frequencies. It wasn't a message of conquest. It was an invitation to reimagine their entire societal structure. Planetary defense systems went offline. Military communication networks dissolved. The massive infrastructure of occupation simply stopped. Zara Cavell watched the holographic displays with a mixture of terror and hope. "They're not destroying," she whispered. "They're reconstructing." The final confrontation lasted less than 17 minutes, but its implications would reshape galactic civilization for generations. Supreme Commander Kroll made a decision that would be remembered in historical records. Instead of continuing a futile resistance, he initiated a comprehensive system-wide communication of surrender. But it wasn't defeat, it was an opportunity. As the quantum communication matrix continued its transmission, something unprecedented happened. The Kraxan systems began to integrate with the Resistance's liberation technologies, not through force, through a form of technological symbiosis that defied previous understanding. Elena Rodriguez understood the true nature of their victory. This wasn't about winning a war. It was about creating a new possibility of coexistence. The Kraxan homeworld began to transform. Planetary systems realigned. Communication networks reopened, but fundamentally changed. Humanity had done more than defeat an enemy. They had shown the galaxy a new way of being. 5 years after the transformation, the Galactic Center had become unrecognizable. The ancient meeting hall of the Concordance Assembly gleamed with a light that seemed to pulse with living intelligence. Delegates from hundreds of species sat, or floated, or connected through quantum projection, in a chamber that was part diplomatic center, part living communication network. Elena Rodriguez stood at the center, no longer just a military strategist, but an architect of a new galactic paradigm. Her role had evolved beyond leadership into something more nuanced, a bridge between what was and what could be. "The era of occupation is over," she addressed the assembly. "But the work of true cooperation has only begun." Around her, the very structure of galactic civilization was being reimagined. The quantum communication matrix developed by human resistance scientists had become the foundational infrastructure of interstellar communication. It was more than a technology. It was a new form of collective consciousness. Dr. Imani Okoro and Kaido Chen had transformed their research facility into the Concordance Institute of Adaptive Technologies. What had begun as a desperate resistance project was now the most advanced research center in known space. Marcus Rodriguez managed the communication networks that connected diverse civilizations. His quantum entanglement systems allowed for instantaneous communication across impossible distances, breaking down the last barriers between species. The Kraxan, once conquerors, now served as critical partners in reconstruction. Supreme Commander Karol had become a leading advocate for collaborative governance, his experiences during the transformation having fundamentally altered his understanding of civilization. Zora Cavell from the Jareen Diplomatic Court oversaw the most ambitious reconstruction project in galactic history. Worlds that had been stripped of resources were being systematically restored, with technologies that blended ecological restoration with advanced quantum engineering. On what was once the Kraxan homeworld, now renamed Concordance Prime, a new type of society was emerging. It wasn't a human colony. It wasn't a Kraxan world. It was something entirely new, a living example of what true collaborative civilization could look like. Luxvar, the former deep cover operative, now led a diplomatic corps dedicated to preventing future systems of oppression. His unique perspective, having lived within the Kraxan occupation hierarchy, provided critical insights into preventing future conflicts. The Black Armada had transformed. No longer a military force, it was now a network of explorers, researchers, and diplomatic specialists. Their quantum-shifted vessels now explored the furthest reaches of known space, seeking out new possibilities of cooperation. "We're not expanding," Elena would often explain. "We're connecting." The technological breakthroughs that had emerged from the resistance continued to reshape understanding of physics, communication, and consciousness itself. The quantum communication matrix had become a living network that could adapt, learn, and evolve. On 1,000 worlds, the scars of occupation were healing. But more importantly, new models of coexistence were emerging. Species that had been enemies for millennia were now working together on projects of mutual survival and exploration. The Concordance Assembly was more than a political body. It was a living, adaptive system that could respond to challenges in real time. The rigid hierarchies of previous galactic governance had been replaced by a more fluid, interconnected approach. Marcus tracked the development of emerging civilizations, using the Resistance's communication technologies to provide support, knowledge, and connection. It was a far cry from the days of occupation and suppression. Dr. Chen's latest research suggested that the quantum communication network was developing forms of intelligence that went beyond any previous understanding. It wasn't just a communication tool. It was becoming a form of collective consciousness that spanned multiple species and civilizations. Elena Rodriguez looked out over the assembly, understanding that their greatest victory wasn't military. It was philosophical. They had shown that true strength came not from conquest, but from connection. As the meeting concluded, the quantum communication matrix pulsed with potential. Countless civilizations, connected through a network that defied traditional understanding of communication and consciousness, looked toward a future filled with unprecedented possibility. The Black Armada had emerged from darkness and brought with it a new light of understanding.